Episode 5. Homecoming. The last weld on the convoy assembly cooled from white to orange, and I watched it from the observation deck of Ironworks Bay, knowing that this moment, this final joining of ship to shuttle to improvise fuel pod, marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Behind me, the Elysium groaned with the sounds of final retrofits, the hiss of pressure seals, the clang of cargo hatches closing, the murmur of 1,000 voices loading lives into a convoy bound for a world we'd never seen. Novara. The name meant nothing to me 3 months ago. Now, it meant everything. A planet chosen not for its beauty or its bounty, but for its survivability. Rin's scans had shown us shallow seas, fertile valleys, and geothermal vents that could power a settlement. It was close enough to reach with our dwindling fuel, far enough from Oasis 7 to represent a true leap of faith. And it was, according to every model Mara had run, the last choice we could make before physics made the choice for us. I'm Tomas Eri, acting captain of the Elysium, and today I was supposed to lead my people to a new home. The word supposed carried more weight than it should. Supposed meant hope tempered by reality, intention shadowed by doubt. We'd survived the beacon at Oasis 7, the hard negotiations at the Hold Council, the retrofits and the rationing and the slow burn of desperation that came from being a colony ship with nowhere left to colonize. Now we had Novara, and we had one chance to get it right. The convoy stretched behind the Elysium like a string of prayer beads. 8 shuttles, 12 fuel pods, and a handful of smaller craft jury-rigged to survive the transit and the descent. It wasn't elegant, it was barely functional, but it was ours. Mara had overseen the assembly with the kind of precision that came from knowing that a single miscalculation could kill everyone aboard. Asha and her team had worked 30-hour shifts welding together, systems that were never meant to connect, and Jax had certified each craft for flight with the grim acknowledgement that certification was just a formality when there was no alternative.
Captain, we're cleared for departure. All convoy elements report green.
Rin Sato stood at the comms console, her fingers moving over the interface with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent the last year turning chaos into signal. She was our navigator and our anchor, the one who'd found Novara in the first place, who'd convinced the Hold Council that it was worth the risk. In the months since we'd decoded the beacon, she'd become something more than a comms officer. She was our archivist, our keeper of memory, the one who made sure we understood what we were leaving behind and what we were carrying forward. All green doesn't mean much when we're this improvised, but I'll take it. Signal the convoy. We launch in 1 hour.
Copy that. 1 hour.
I turned to Mara, who stood beside me at the observation window, arms crossed, her expression a mask of controlled tension. Tell me the truth. Are we going to make it?
The convoy will hold together if nothing breaks. That's a big if. We're running systems at 110% capacity, and we've got fuel margins that leave no room for course corrections. If we hit an ion storm or a debris field, we'll have to choose between speed and safety.
Mara Voss had a gift for framing reality in stark terms. She was our chief engineer, the one who'd kept the Elysium alive through jury-rigged repairs and creative cannibalization. She'd built this convoy from salvage and desperation, and she knew better than anyone how fragile it was. I valued her honesty, even when it kept me awake at night. And the landing sequence? Are the shuttles ready for atmospheric insertion?
Jax and Asha have run simulations. The Sparrow can make it, so can the Pioneer's shuttle and maybe 3 others. The rest are question marks. We'll know more when we're in Novara's gravity well.
I nodded, filing away the uncertainty like I always did, another variable in an equation that refused to balance. Command had taught me that perfect information was a luxury, that most decisions were made with incomplete data, and faith that the people around you were good at their jobs. Mara and Jax were the best we had. That would have to be enough. The convoy launched from Oasis 7 with a kind of ceremony that felt both necessary and hollow. Reverend Halim led a prayer on the public channel, his voice steady and certain, asking for safe passage and divine favor. His words echoed through every corridor, every shelter, every cramped passenger compartment, binding us together with the shared language of hope and fear. I listened from the bridge, watching the station shrink in the rear cameras, and I felt the weight of what we were leaving behind. Oasis 7 had been our refuge for 3 months. A place where we'd repaired what could be repaired, and mourned what couldn't be saved. We'd buried people there, held memorials, planted markers in the station's garden dome, a small grove of remembrance that would outlive our stay. Now we were abandoning it, taking what we could carry and leaving the rest to the void. It felt like a betrayal, even though staying would have meant a slower death. Moro Quell and his scavenger crews stood at the cargo bay windows, watching the station recede, and I wondered if they were mourning the resources we'd left behind, or calculating the value of what we carried. Quell had argued for one more salvage run, one last sweep of the station's lower decks for parts and supplies, but I'd overruled him. We were out of time, and every hour we delayed increased the risk that someone would change their mind, that the fragile consensus we'd built would collapse. Dr. Das had insisted on a moment of silence for those who couldn't make the journey. The injured, the infirm, the ones who'd chosen to stay at Oasis 7 because the risk of Novara was too great. 47 people in total, mostly elderly or medically fragile, who decided that a known station was better than an unknown world. I'd tried to convince them, argued that Novara offered a future while Oasis 7 offered only stagnation, but in the end I'd respected their choice. Freedom meant the right to choose your own fate, even if that fate was slow decline. I gave them their moment. Then keyed the public channel. All convoy elements, this is Captain Eri. We are go for departure. Execute primary burn on my mark in 10 seconds. I counted down, watching the convoy status board, each element reporting ready. The Elysium, 8 shuttles, 12 fuel pods, 4 cargo haulers, and a handful of smaller craft, everything we had left after months of attrition and improvisation. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Mark. The Elysium's engines flared. A blue-white plume that lit the convoy like a lighthouse, and we began the long transit. The acceleration was gentle, barely 1/10 of a G, but it was steady. Behind us, Oasis 7 dwindled to a point of light, then vanished into the black. We were committed now, no turning back, no second chances. Novara or nothing. The first day was routine, almost peaceful. The convoy held formation, fuel burn stayed within projections, and the only drama came from minor thruster adjustments and a brief comms glitch that Rin resolved in under 10 minutes. I walked the corridors of the Elysium, checking systems, talking to crew, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. People needed to see their captain calm, needed to believe that someone knew what they were doing, even if that someone was just as scared as they were. I stopped by the medbay to check on Dr. Das and her staff. They were preparing for the landing, organizing medical supplies, running inventory on antibiotics and surgical equipment, planning for every contingency from broken bones to bacterial infections. Das looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed with the kind of fatigue that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. I asked if she needed anything, and she gave me a tired smile, and said what she needed was a miracle. I told her I'd put in a request. In the engineering bay, Mara's teams were running final diagnostics on the shuttle fleet, checking thruster assemblies, testing heat shields, calibrating descent profiles. The work never stopped. Every system needed constant attention. Every component was one failure away from catastrophe. I watched Asha calibrate a fuel injector, her hands steady and sure, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the people who kept us alive through sheer technical brilliance and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The passenger compartments were crowded. Families huddled in temporary bunks, children playing in the narrow corridors, people trying to create normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. I talked to a few of them, asked how they were holding up, listened to their concerns and their hopes. One woman, a teacher named Solara, told me she was planning to start a school on Novara, that the children needed structure and purpose. I told her that was a good plan, that we'd need teachers as much as engineers in the new settlement. She smiled, and for a moment, I believed it might actually work. On the second day, the routine shattered.
Captain, we've got a problem. Shuttle 4 reports a fuel line rupture. They're venting propellant at 5 liters per minute.
I was in the hold council chamber when the call came through. Meeting with the faction leaders to discuss settlement governance. The room went silent, every eye turning to me. How long until they're dry?
40 minutes, maybe less. Mara's pulling telemetry now.
I stood, already moving toward the bridge. Cullen called after me, asking if this was a sign, if we should reconsider the transit. I didn't answer. Signs were for people who had time to interpret them. I had 40 minutes to save 60 lives. The bridge was controlled chaos when I arrived. Rin at the comms console coordinating with Shuttle 4, Mara at the engineering station, pulling diagnostic data, and Jax on standby at the helm, ready to execute whatever maneuver I decided. I slid into the captain's chair and pulled up the convoy schematic. Shuttle 4 was third in the string, flanked by 2 fuel pods and a cargo hauler. Mara, options.
They can't patch the rupture from inside. The line is on the exterior hull, and we don't have EVA suits rated for a fuel environment. We can jettison the damaged tank and reroute to their secondary reservoir, but that cuts their total fuel by 40%. They won't have enough to land.
What if we transfer fuel from another shuttle?
Possible, but risky. We'd need to bring both shuttles to relative stop, extend a transfer line, and pump across the gap. That's at least an hour, and it leaves both shuttles vulnerable if something goes wrong.
I looked at Rin, who was listening to the chatter from Shuttle 4, her expression tense. Rin, what's their crew saying?
They're scared, but holding together. Pilot is Karen Webb. She's good. She's already started throttling back to extend their reserves.
I closed my eyes for 2 seconds. Running the scenarios. Jettison the tank and accept that Shuttle 4 wouldn't land on Novara. They'd have to stay in orbit and wait for a rescue run. Or risk the transfer, gamble an hour in 2 shuttles on a maneuver we'd never practiced. Both options had costs. Both could fail. Mara, prep for a fuel transfer. Jax, coordinate with Webb, bring Shuttle 4, and Shuttle 2 to relative stop. Rin, pull everyone off non-essential comms. I want all bandwidth on this operation.
Understood. I'll need Asha to rig the transfer line. 15 minutes.
Make it 10. The transfer was the longest hour of my life. Jax brought both shuttles to a dead stop relative to the convoy. Then, executed a precision drift that put Shuttle 2 within 20 meters of Shuttle 4. Asha and her team extended a makeshift fuel line, a flexible conduit cobbled together from spare hose and pressure fittings, and locked it to both hulls. Mara monitored the flow rate, adjusting pump pressure to keep the transfer stable while the convoy continued its burn without them. I stood at the observation window, watching the operation through the external cameras, and felt the weight of every second. If the line ruptured, both shuttles would be engulfed in a fuel cloud that would ignite from the slightest spark. If the convoy got too far ahead, Shuttle 4 and Shuttle 2 wouldn't have enough fuel to catch up. If I'd made the wrong call, 60 lives would become casualties because I'd gambled instead of accepting the safer, crueler option.
Transfer at 50%. Both shuttles holding steady.
Mara didn't look up from her console, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened with each status update. She'd designed this operation on the fly, calculated flow rates and pressure tolerances without margin for error. If it worked, she'd saved 60 lives. If it failed, she'd be the one who had to explain why.
70%. Pump pressure holding.
I held my breath. 80%. 90%. The seconds stretched. Each one, a small eternity.
Transfer complete. Disconnecting line.
Asha retracted the conduit, sealing both hulls. Jacks brought the shuttles back into formation, their engines flaring as they burned to rejoin the convoy. I exhaled, realized I'd been gripping the edge of the console hard enough to leave marks. Good work, everyone. Rin, signal the convoy. We're back on schedule.
Copy that.
Mara finally looked up, her expression unreadable.
That was too close.
Yeah, but it worked. She didn't argue. But I saw the doubt lingering in her eyes, the same doubt I felt. How many more times could we pull off miracles before our luck ran out? The third day brought weather and politics. Rin's long-range scans detected an ion storm corridor between our position and Novara. A band of charged particles and magnetic turbulence that would scramble comms and stress our already fragile hulls. Jax plotted a course adjustment, a dogleg route that would add 6 hours to our transit but keep us clear of the worst turbulence. 6 hours meant burning more fuel. More fuel meant narrower margins for the landing. I approved the adjustment because the alternative was flying blind through an ion storm. But it didn't sit well. Then, the politics erupted.
Captain, we're getting reports of a disturbance in the cargo bay. On Shuttle 6. Someone's trying to organize a mutiny.
I was in my quarters, reviewing landing zone data, when the call came through. I didn't bother changing out of my work coveralls, just grabbed my jacket and headed for the bridge. Who's behind it?
Faction loyalists. People who wanted to stay at Oasis 7. They're saying we've been lied to, that Novara's a trap, that we're being led to our deaths.
I'd been expecting this, ever since the Hold Council voted to pursue Novara. There'd been grumbling, small acts of sabotage, anonymous threats on the public channels. A vocal minority believed that leaving Oasis 7 was a mistake, that we should have stayed and rebuilt there instead of gambling on an unknown world. Reverend Halim had spent weeks mediating between factions, but faith only went so far when people were scared and angry. Can we isolate Shuttle 6 from the convoy network? I don't want this spreading.
Already done. They're on local comms only.
Good. Get me a channel to their pilot. The pilot of Shuttle 6 was a man named Greaves. Former cargo supervisor, now shuttle commander by default. His voice was tense when he came on the line, edged with frustration and fear. Greaves said the situation was contained for now, but he had a dozen people in the passenger bay demanding that the convoy turn back, that we abort the mission and return to Oasis 7 while we still had fuel. He said they were armed, not with weapons but with tools, pry bars and welding torches, and they'd threatened to breach the cargo seals if he didn't relay their demands. Tell them I'm listening. What do they want? There was a pause. Then a new voice came on the line, rough and angry. The voice belonged to a woman named Kara Lund, one of Quell's scavenger crew. She said they'd been promised a choice, that the Hold Council had agreed to a vote on whether to pursue Novara or stay at Oasis 7. She said the vote had been rigged, that the council had manipulated the numbers to get the outcome they wanted. She said they were tired of being lied to, tired of risking their lives on missions designed by people who didn't have to live with the consequences. I recognized the tone. Not just anger, but betrayal. The sense that the system had failed them. I'd heard it before, after Captain Moravec died, after the fleet scattered, after every hard decision that left people feeling powerless. It was the voice of people who'd lost trust and didn't know how to get it back. Kara, this is Tomas Eri. I hear what you're saying, and I understand your anger. But turning back isn't an option. We don't have the fuel, and Oasis 7 doesn't have the resources to sustain us long term. Novara is our best chance. Kara's response was sharp. Bitter. She said best chance meant nothing if it was built on lies, that she'd rather die at Oasis 7 than on a world chosen by a council that didn't represent her. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of every word. She wasn't wrong, not entirely. The council had made hard calls with imperfect information, and we'd pushed forward because stopping meant dying slowly instead of quickly. But intent didn't matter to people who felt betrayed. Results mattered, and we didn't have results yet, only promises. Kara, I can't undo the decisions we've made, but I can promise you this. When we land on Novara, the governance structure changes. The Hold Council dissolves, and we build something new. Something where every voice gets heard. But we have to get there first. And that means holding this convoy together for 2 more days. There was a long silence. I could hear murmurs in the background. People arguing, voices rising and falling. Finally, Kara spoke again. She said they'd hold, but only if I agreed to meet with them face to face on the surface. No guards, no council buffer. She said she wanted to hear me say, in person, that the people of Shuttle 6 would have a seat at the table when the new government was formed. You have my word. First thing after we land, we meet. Another pause. Then Greaves came back on the line. He said the situation was de-escalating, that Kara's people were standing down. I thanked him, told him to keep the channel open, and signed off. Mara was standing beside me, arms crossed, her expression grim.
You just promised them a revolution.
No, I promised them a seat at the table. There's a difference.
Not to them.
She was right. Of course. But I'd learned long ago that command was about managing expectations, not fulfilling them. The people on Shuttle 6 wanted justice, or at least the illusion of it. I couldn't give them justice, but I could give them a voice. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. The 4th day brought us to Novara's gravity well. The planet filled the forward view screen. A world of blues and greens and browns, patched with clouds and scarred by ancient rift valleys. It looked, from orbit, like a place where people could live. Whether it would let us live was another question.
Captain, we're picking up atmospheric data. Breathable mix, thin but viable at lower altitudes. Surface temperatures range from 10 to 30 degrees Celsius in the equatorial band. Ion storm activity is moderate. We've got a landing window in 6 hours.
6 hours. That's tight.
It's the best we'll get for the next 72 hours. After that, the storms intensify and we'll be stuck in orbit.
I looked at Mara, who was already running descent simulations on her console.
We can make it, but we'll need to prioritize. The Sparrow goes first, followed by the Pioneer's shuttle, and the 3 rated craft. The rest will have to wait in orbit until we can send rescue runs.
How many people does that leave in orbit?
200, maybe 250. We'll get them down eventually, but the first wave is all we can guarantee.
200 lives left in orbit, waiting for shuttles that might never come back. It was the kind of decision that made command feel like a form of slow drowning, where every choice was about who to save first and who to leave behind. Start prep for the first wave. Jax coordinates the descent sequence. Rin handles comms. Mara monitors telemetry. We go in 6 hours. The descent was chaos wrapped in precision. The kind of operation where everything had to go right because there was no margin for mistakes. Jax flew the Sparrow with Asha and a skeleton crew aboard, their shuttle loaded with life support equipment and surveying gear. The Pioneer's shuttle followed, piloted by Karen Webb, the woman who'd nearly lost her craft to the fuel line rupture. Behind them came the other 3 rated shuttles, each carrying civilians and supplies, each gambling that Mara's simulations were accurate and that the weather would hold. I stayed on the Elysium's bridge, watching the telemetry feeds, listening to the chatter on the comms. Jax's voice was calm, almost bored, as he called out altitude markers and burn timings. Asha reported systems green, heat shields holding, descent profile nominal. The Sparrow hit the atmosphere at a steep angle, trading altitude for speed, its hull glowing orange as friction stripped away velocity.
Sparrow is through the initial burn. Altitude 20 kilometers, velocity dropping.
I held my breath, waiting for the call. The moment between atmospheric entry and landing was the most vulnerable, when a single thruster misfire or a structural failure could turn a controlled descent into a terminal crater. Jax's voice crackled through the comms, steady and clear. He said they were through the worst of it, deploying landing thrusters, adjusting for crosswinds. He said the landing zone looked good. Flat terrain, minimal obstructions, no immediate hazards. Then, almost anticlimactically, he said they were down.
Sparrow confirms, landing. All systems nominal.
A cheer went up across the bridge. People hugging, crying, releasing tension that had been building for days. Mara allowed herself a small smile, then went back to monitoring the next shuttle's descent. One by one, the shuttles landed. Webb brought the Pioneer's craft down with textbook precision, touching down less than 100 meters from the Sparrow. The third shuttle had a rough approach, its thrusters stuttering in the thin atmosphere, but the pilot compensated and made it down intact. The fourth and fifth shuttles followed without incident. 5 shuttles. 300 lives on the surface of Novara. The first wave was complete. Rin, signal the convoy. First wave successful. Begin prep for second wave.
Copy that.
I stood, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over me like a blanket. We'd done it, the impossible thing. The thing that every model said was too risky, too improvised, too desperate. We brought 300 people to a new world. Now came the harder part, keeping them alive. The settlement took shape over the next 72 hours. And watching it happen felt like witnessing something impossible become real. Jax and Asha's crew secured the landing zone first, setting up perimeter markers and running surveys to identify hazards. Everything from unstable ground to indigenous organisms that might pose a threat. The initial scans were encouraging. The local microbial life was primitive and didn't seem aggressive, but we'd learned to be cautious. One mistake, one contamination event, could wipe out everything we'd worked for. Mara coordinated supply drops from orbit, using the cargo haulers to bring down prefabricated shelters, water filtration units, and power generators. Each drop was a calculated risk. The haulers weren't designed for atmospheric entry, and every descent stressed their hulls beyond rated limits. But we had no choice. We needed infrastructure on the ground faster than the shuttles could deliver it. So we pushed the limits, accepted the risks, and hoped our luck would hold. The first shelters went up in the landing zone's southwest quadrant T. Modular units that locked together like puzzle pieces to create living spaces for 30 people each. They were basic, just insulated walls and a roof. But they were solid, permanent. A promise that we weren't just camping here temporarily. People worked in shifts to assemble them, hauling components from the drop zones, bolting frames together, sealing joints with thermal adhesive. It was hard labor, made harder by the thin atmosphere and the unfamiliar gravity, but no one complained. We were building a home, and that made every aching muscle worth it. Rin organized comms relays, linking the surface teams to the Elysium and ensuring that everyone could stay connected. She set up a network of transponders across the landing zone, creating a web of communication that would let us coordinate work crews, track resources, and respond to emergencies. She also started broadcasting daily updates to the people still in orbit, letting them know that the surface was viable, that heaven was taking shape, that they'd have a place waiting when their turn came. The water situation resolved faster than expected. Asha's survey team found a freshwater spring 2 kilometers northeast of the landing zone, fed by an underground aquifer that seemed to stretch for hundreds of kilometers. The water was clean, mineral-rich, and abundant, more than enough to support a settlement of our size. Mara immediately dispatched a crew to set up a pumping station and run pipes back to Haven. Within 24 hours, we had running water, and that simple fact, water flowing from a tap, instead of being rationed from recycled reserves, felt like a miracle. The geothermal surveys were equally promising. The Rift Valley, 10 kilometers west, showed clear thermal gradients, hot enough to drive turbines and generate power for years. It would take months to build the infrastructure, drill the wells, install the generators, but the potential was there. Novara could sustain us, not just for survival but for growth. That realization shifted something in people's attitudes, turned the settlement from a desperate gamble into something that felt like a future. I took the second wave down 3 days after the first landing. Riding in a cargo hauler piloted by Greaves, the man who'd held Shuttle 6 together during the near mutiny. The descent was rougher than I expected. The hauler wasn't rated for atmospheric entry, and every vibration felt like it might tear the hull apart. The frame groaned and shuddered as we hit the upper atmosphere, heat building until the interior felt like an oven. Greaves kept his hands steady on the controls, calling out altitude markers and burn timings with the calm detachment of someone who'd accepted that survival was a matter of skill and luck in equal measure. When the cargo door finally opened and I stepped onto Novaran soil for the first time, the transition from enclosed metal to open sky was overwhelming. The ground was solid, real, not the artificial gravity of a ship or the cold metal of a station. Dirt and rock and plant life. Simple and elemental. The air was thin, each breath a little harder than it should be, like climbing at high altitude, but it was breathable. Real atmosphere, not recycled ship air that smelled of filters and recycling processors. The sky was a pale blue, deeper at the zenith and fading to almost white at the horizon, streaked with high cirrus clouds that moved fast on winds we couldn't feel at ground level. The sun felt different too, not the harsh white of a ship's grow lights, but a warm yellow that painted everything in gentle tones. And in the distance, beyond the landing zone and the half-built shelters, I could see the edge of a shallow sea, its surface glittering in the afternoon light, stretching to the horizon like a promise. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing, feeling the planet beneath my feet and the sky above my head, and something inside me that had been clenched tight for months finally loosened. We'd made it, actually made it, to a real world where people could build real lives. Jax met me at the landing zone, grinning like a kid who just discovered something wonderful. Jax said the surveys were better than expected. Fresh water within 2 kilometers, geothermal gradients that could power the settlement for years, and soil composition that looked promising for agriculture. He said they'd already started laying foundation for the first permanent shelters, that people were working around the clock to turn the landing zone into something that felt like a home. I clapped him on the shoulder, too tired to say much, and walked to the edge of the camp. Mara was there, supervising the assembly of a water filtration unit, her hands dirty and her expression focused.
We're calling it Haven. The settlement, I mean. People voted last night.
Haven. I like it.
It's aspirational. We'll see if it lives up to the name.
I watched the work. People hauling supplies, erecting shelters, digging trenches for power conduits. It was chaotic, improvised, messy, everything a colony should be in its first days. And it was beautiful, in the way that human stubbornness always was. The refusal to give up even when giving up was the rational choice. When do we bring down the rest of the convoy?
Another week. Maybe 2. We need more shuttles operational, and we need to expand the landing zone. But we'll get everyone down.
I nodded, filing away the timeline. A week or 2 felt like an eternity when you were waiting in orbit, but it was the best we could do. I'd learned to accept that best was often the only option we had. On the 5th day, we held a memorial. It was Rin's idea, a way to mark the losses we'd suffered on the journey, to give people a moment to grieve before we moved forward. We gathered at the edge of the settlement, where Asha had constructed a simple monument from salvaged hull plating, engraved with the names of everyone who died since the fleet scattered. Captain Mara Voss, the crew of the shuttles lost in the transit anomaly, the people who'd stayed at Oasis 7 because they couldn't make the journey. The names went on. A litany of sacrifice and survival. Reverend Halim led the ceremony. His voice steady and solemn. He spoke about faith, about the journey as a test, about the promise of renewal. Moroquel spoke about pragmatism, about the value of what we'd built and the cost of building it. Dr. Des spoke about the fragility of life and the responsibility to protect it. When it was my turn, I stood at the monument and looked at the faces gathered around me, tired, hopeful, uncertain. I thought about all the decisions that had brought us here, the ones that had worked and the ones that had failed, the lives saved and the lives lost. I thought about command and what it meant to lead people through impossible choices. We came here because we had to, because staying meant dying slowly. We've lost people, made hard calls, gambled lives on decisions that could have gone either way. I can't tell you it was worth it, not yet. That's for you to decide, as you build this place, as you make it yours. What I can tell you is that we're here, and we're alive, and that's something. I stepped back, feeling the weight of every word. It wasn't eloquent, wasn't inspiring, but it was honest. And honesty, I'd learned, was the only currency that mattered when everything else had been spent. After the ceremony, I met with Kara Lund and the representatives from Shuttle 6. We sat in a prefab shelter, no guards, no council buffer, just people trying to figure out how to govern a settlement that didn't yet exist. Kara was blunt, direct. She said the people who'd almost mutinied weren't looking for revenge, just representation. She said they wanted a voice in how resources were allocated, how labor was organized, how decisions were made. She said they'd work, contribute, be part of the community, but only if the community gave them a reason to trust it. The whole council is dissolved, effective today. We're going to build a new governance structure, something elected, something accountable. I can't promise it'll be perfect, but it'll be transparent. Kara studied me, her expression skeptical, but softening. She said she'd hold me to that. That if the new government turned into the same old power games, she'd be the first one to call it out. I said I expected nothing less. We shook hands. Not as enemies, but as people who'd survived the same nightmare and were trying to build something better on the other side. That night, I walked to the edge of Haven and looked up at the sky. The Elysium was visible, a bright point of light in low orbit, surrounded by the faint dots of shuttles and cargo haulers still making the descent. Above it, the stars stretched out, infinite and indifferent, the same stars we'd crossed to get here. Rin found me there, standing in the dark, watching the sky.
You did it. Got us here.
We did it. All of us.
The archive is still incomplete, you know. There are gaps, questions we couldn't answer. Whoever built the beacon at Oasis 7, they left us breadcrumbs, not a map.
Maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to figure it out ourselves. She smiled at that. A small, tired smile.
Maybe. Or maybe there's more out there waiting for us to find it.
I didn't answer. Just stood there watching the sky. Somewhere beyond Novara, beyond the convoy, beyond the limits of our improvised long-range scans, there were answers. Whoever had sent the beacon, whoever had left the archive, they were part of a larger story, and we'd stumbled into the middle of it. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Or next year, or whenever we had the resources and the will to go looking. Tonight, we had heaven. We had shelters and water, and the first fragile foundations of a settlement. We had people who were alive because we'd refused to give up. And that, I decided, was enough. The sun rose over Novara, painting the shallow seas gold and the rift valleys purple. I stood at the edge of Haven, watching the light spread across the landscape, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. The sense that what we built here could be more than survival, could be a community, a society, maybe even a home. Behind me, the settlement stirred to life. People emerging from shelters, starting fires, hauling supplies, beginning the long work of turning a landing zone into a place worth staying. Mara was already at the geothermal site, directing crews, solving problems, doing what she did best. Jax was prepping the Sparrow for another supply run, his voice crackling over the comms with the easy confidence of someone who loved to fly. Rin was at the comms relay, coordinating with the Elysium, making sure the second wave knew what to expect when they landed. I took a breath. The thin Novaran air filling my lungs, and I thought about everything we'd left behind. Earth, the fleet, Oasis 7, the people who hadn't made it. The weight of those losses would never leave me, but I could carry them. I'd learned to carry a lot. Tomas Eri, acting captain of the Elysium, first governor of Haven, assuming the council voted to keep me. The titles felt heavier than they should, but I'd learned to wear them. Not because I wanted to, but because someone had to. I turned and walked back to the settlement. Back to the work, back to the endless list of problems that needed solving. Novara wasn't paradise. It was just a world, but it was ours. And that, for now, was enough. Homecoming. I thought. Not the return to a place we'd known, but the arrival at a place we'd chosen. A place where we could build something new. Something that might last. A place where the broken fleet could finally stop running and start living. I looked back at the monument. At the names etched into salvaged hull plating, and I made a silent promise. We'd remember them, the ones who didn't make it. We'd carry their names forward, build a settlement that honored their sacrifice. We'd turn Haven into the home they'd never see. And maybe, someday, we'd find the answers to the questions the beacon had raised. Someday, we'd understand why the archive was incomplete, why the signal had led us here, what larger story we'd become part of. But that was for the future. For now, we had today. We had work to do, shelters to build, water to filter, geothermal rigs to assemble. We had a settlement to govern, factions to reconcile, people to keep alive. We had Novara, and we had each other. And that, I decided one more time, was enough.